Madam President,
Senator from Minnesota.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, I rise today to express my strong support for the Veterans Job Corps Act. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the bill. I'd like to thank Senator Nelson for introducing the bill, and I'd like to thank Senator Murray, Chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, for bringing this bill to the Senate and for all that she's done for our nation's veterans. Veterans have done so much for our country, serving courageously in the military, and they have been tested so profoundly and so many times over the last decade. These men and women have done everything for us. We owe them. That means they deserve the best health care and other benefits that they've earned from the Department of Veterans Affairs. And that means a home. Last weekend, I was back in Minnesota at a Habitat for Humanity build, doing critical home repairs for a Minnesota Guard veteran, Sergeant Brian Neal, and his family. Brian is a 23-year veteran of the National Guard, part of the Minnesota National Guard unit, the legendary Red Bulls, who had their deployment in Iraq extended so that it was one of the longest, if not the longest, deployment in U.S. history. While Brian was in Iraq, his son was hit by a drunk driver while returning home from his junior ROTC training, and he sustained severe brain injury and is severely disabled. In Iraq, Brian, who mentored younger soldiers, saved the life of one of those soldiers, Brian, again, being a 23-year vet, mentored these young kids, and they were in a convoy, and he saw one of them get out and collapse. And he recognized the heat stroke and saved his life. Sergeant Neal himself returned from Iraq suffering from very serious physical and psychological wounds that leave his wife, Jane, as a caregiver for both Brian and their son. And I have to tell you, they're just the most wonderful people. It was an amazing experience to help them with home repairs that will make sure that they have the home that meets their needs. But when I talk to veterans in Minnesota these days, the thing I hear most about is jobs, about employment. A job means money, of course, but it means much more. It means a new mission. Without a job, you really can't reintegrate into your community and start a new phase of your life. Veterans unemployment in Minnesota, as I'm sure it is in the presider's state of New York, is way too high. My message to employers in Minnesota is simple. These are the people you want to hire. They've got the skills, they've got the discipline. We all have a role to play in making sure veterans have jobs. Employers in the private sector, state government, colleges and universities, municipalities, and also the federal government. That's how we do it in Minnesota. Let me give you an example. We had several thousand Red Bulls deployed to Kuwait, and the Minnesota National Guard recognized that a large number of them weren't going to have jobs when they come back. So the Guard and Minnesota's outstanding Department of Employment and Economic Development went upstream, as they say, to Kuwait to get ahead of the problem. They brought corporate leaders from Minnesota, businesses like Target and Best Buy, and they also brought folks from MnSCU, which is the Minnesota state colleges and university system. They brought them to Kuwait to provide training for the Guard members on entering or re-entering the workforce. They were able to share invaluable information with the Red Bulls on writing a resume, getting ready for an interview, and doing well in it. One of the problems is that very often soldiers coming back from Afghanistan, came back from Iraq, from Kuwait, very often in a job interview will say, we did this, we did that, we did this, we did that. That's how you think in the military. Employers want to know what you, yourself, individually did. So that it was simply, you know, the employment guys from Target going, no, just say I, you know, little tips like that. And it's been very helpful. So we all have a role to play. At the federal level last year, we passed the Vow to Hire Heroes Act that expanded and created new tax credits for businesses that hire veterans. And I've been spreading the word in Minnesota. And I know the presiding officer has been spreading the word in New York. So our businesses know that for every unemployed veteran they hire, they can get a tax credit up to $9,600. That's $9,600 for hiring a veteran who has a service-related disability, and it ratchets down a little bit, but this is a good incentive for businesses to be hiring our veterans. The legislation we're considering today, the Veterans Job Corps Act, is the next step that we can and that we should take at the federal level. The bill creates a Veterans Job Corps through the Department of Veterans Affairs in cooperation with other departments, where thousands of veterans will be able to work on conservation and resource management in our nation's public lands. Now, under this bill, veterans will have the opportunity to restore and protect parks and forests and other public lands, whether they be national, state, or tribal. Veterans will be hired to maintain the infrastructure and facilities on these public lands. The bill will also provide funding for veterans to become firefighters and law enforcement officers. Excuse me. It'll also provide licensing and certification for certain skills that veterans had when they were deployed, emergency medical, in emergency medical nursing assistants, and also drivers. So many men and women drive in these theaters, and so just to ease their getting certification, this bill does that as well. But this part about working in our nation's parks and these national lands that are so treasured, this is really based on the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, from the New Deal, which was created through a combination of actions by Franklin Roosevelt and legislation, of course, by Congress. It was very successful. It was the most popular program of the New Deal. And in fact, at that time, veterans were specifically included among those who could be enrolled in the CCC. As I said, the CCC was one of the most successful programs that helped us get through the Depression. My wife, Franny's Uncle James, who died not long ago at the age of 96, worked for the post office, for the Postal Service, and served with the U.S. Army Postal Service in England, France, and Germany during World War II. He was the greatest generation guy. But before that, during the Depression, he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps. He was part of the crew that built the road through Evans Notch, a beautiful mountainous area at the border of Maine and New Hampshire. My wife's from Maine. This was one of James' proudest achievements in life. If you read his obituary, it's one of the most prominent parts of his obituary, along with his service during World War II. And that's the kind of thing that the Veterans Job Corps can be. We've got to do this work on our public lands. Our parks, our forests, and other public lands need to be maintained and preserved and improved. Why not put our veterans to work doing it? They've got the skills, they've got the experience, and they've got the discipline for it. For instance, if you've spent a lot of time on duty outside and you work in teams, which is obviously true of a huge number of those who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, you're going to be very well suited for this work. If you've built roads in Iraq or Afghanistan, you're well prepared to maintain or manage resources in Minnesota's beautiful parks, forests, trails, and other public lands under a little less pressure, by the way. Minnesota has over 227,000 acres of land in 73 state and national parks and recreation areas, and that doesn't count our innumerable public lands under more local jurisdiction. These are some of the most beautiful places in the country: the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, Voyageurs National Park, Superior and Chippewa National Forests, or the trails along the Mississippi and the St. Croix rivers, just to name a few. These need to be protected, maintained, and improved and restored. This is important work, and it is dignified work. If you're making sure it's in your obituary 60 years later, 70 years later, you know that it is very important, dignified work. And what better way to preserve the beauty of these places than having veterans do it, our heroes do it. The bill also incorporates a number of other veterans' job provisions from other bills sponsored by my colleagues from both sides of the aisle. And the one I started to mention before is the certification and licensure requirements, becoming a nursing assistant or an emergency medical technician. I knew I was looking for a word, it was technician. And for getting a commercial driver's license. And this is also an issue that my colleague, my senior senator from Minnesota, Senator Klobuchar, has spent a lot of time working on. The provision in this bill, authored by Senator Pryor, tells states that they have to take military training into consideration in issuing licenses for those jobs if they want to continue getting federal funds for some important veteran employment programs that states administer. This will provide an additional incentive for states to make sure that service members' highly relevant training and experience in these fields can be translated into civilian qualifications, eliminating the need for duplicative training and opening the door to many more jobs for highly trained veterans. I can tell you, at 7 USO tours, our men and women in the military are magnificent. And they are highly trained, and man, are they disciplined, and man, are they great, and they deserve this. The Veterans Job Corps is a great idea for employing our veterans, our nation's veterans, doing the important work of preserving, protecting, and improving our nation's public lands and serving as first responders, again, police and firefighters. It is my strong hope that we will be able to bring debate on this bill to a close, pass it, and have it enacted into law. Our nation's veterans deserve nothing less. And Madam President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.